Yo, what's up guys? Grim here. So we got our patch notes finally, and I gotta say, they're not exactly what I was hoping for, and there wasn't as many buffs to stuff as I would have liked. However, there was a lot of interesting stuff in there, and a lot of stuff that I think a lot of people didn't notice. So what I've done is kind of compiled a little TLDR, and I'm gonna go over what I thought was really interesting, and the effects I think it's kind of gonna have on the game. So just to start off with, the new stuff we're getting a new expansion. That's the War for the Atlas, all the Shaper, and all the stuff. That's really cool. We're getting the brand new league, which is the Abyss League, which is, I guess, again, pretty cool. And we're getting 48 new unique items, which that's a really big, important one to keep in the back of our mind throughout all of this. And just a few quality of life features we're going to be getting is that you can now turn in div cards from your hideout, and they're splitting up the vulnerability gem into another separate gem, one for damage over time and one for physical things, which is a little bit of a nerf to physical builds because they can no longer use witch fiber, but that's a different topic. And then finally, we get 10 new skill gems, nine of which we already know, and honestly, I think all of them are quite underwhelming. Um, Anyway, moving on. So that's all pretty cool, but let's get to the nerf stuff, the stuff they smashed with the ban hammer. And to start off, probably the biggest, most influential change is the Queen of the Forest nerf. They've reduced it from being completely uncapped. You can get as much movement speed as much as like evasion you have. Um, and they've capped that out at 100%. Now 100% is still a lot of movement speed, and this item is definitely going to still be used 100%. But it's not even close to what it used to be. Like you're not going to be able to go Pathfinder and get all of the flasks and move around the map at warp speeds anymore. That's not going to really happen like as much as it used to. It'll still happen a little bit, but you won't see like super speedy. And also on top of that, the evasion on the item was nerfed. It was a pretty large evasion piece, and you could almost break even on the movement speed penalty just by wearing a well-rolled one, which is kind of ridiculous. So yeah, I think it definitely deserved the nerf. For having such a powerful thing without having to use any movement skills. I think it was just a little bit too good. So yeah, that was nerfed, and I'm going to talk about that later when we get to the skills which use that a lot, because that's going to affect them a heap. Next up, we got Belt of the Deceiver. Basically, it doesn't work with spells anymore; it's just attacks. I never personally was a really big fan of this, but a lot of supports wore this, and it was basically a 10% more multiplier because it increased the damage the monsters take. So it was very powerful belt. I don't think it's really a big problem. It still works for attacks, so yeah, that's something. Moving on, so at Zeri's Acuity, it got basically gutted. It's no longer going to give instant leech, and basically what it gives you is Vaal Pact on critical strike. But honestly, I don't think that's worth like having your globs for, especially for how much and how rare they're going to be. So yeah, I don't think I see anyone really using this unless they want to use it for the novelty of it or a very specific niche. Like maybe like they use it in a Blade Vortex build on Shaper, just trying to face tank the beam again with like a ton of leech. But yeah, I personally would not be using them anymore. Moving on, so we got Doom Fletcher's Prism. They basically took the crit off that, which when you work it out is going to take the base crit of the item from 7% to 5%, and that's a really huge nerf to the damage of the item because the way it works is it takes your base crit on the item and multiplies that by like everything on your gear, like diamond rings and the skill tree. So say you had 200% crit, that would increase the 7% to 21, but now it's going to be 15. So that's a really big difference. Um, so yeah, and they also nerfed the damage conversion on it from 110% of all the fizz to 100. That's not really a big deal, like whatever. It's just a slight hit. It's mainly the crit that's the big nerf to the bow. It's probably still the best in slot bow though, as they said in their post. I don't really see anything else beating it, especially with the new Abyss jewels coming out. Like with the new Abyss jewels coming out with flat fizz, like Doomfletch might actually be better than it was in this expansion. It really depends on what kind of modifiers they have on those. So moving on, this is a really huge nerf coming out. The Baron, before it gave all of your strength to minions, and now it gives half. So that's a pretty massive nerf. I personally never really played with it. I wasn't a big fan of the whole life-based summoner. I much prefer ES, going the kind of low-life Aurobot kind of thing. But yeah, I do know a lot of people really enjoyed that build, and this is like a pretty big hit to it. So yeah, definitely something you're gonna have to like change your build around with, I reckon. But it might still be usable. I'm not entirely sure as I have not used it. The next one is probably the biggest like gutted skill on the entire list. They decided to take Dark Pact to the slaughterhouse. Um, so basically, they completely removed all the bonus radius you get from using it on yourself. So basically, what you used to get was +4 radius if you self-casted it on yourself. And when you take into account all the multipliers that happen with radius, and there's not actually any way to flat increase spell radius apart from the percentage multipliers, which kind of fall off after getting a lot. It's a really huge nerf to how big the area is going to be on Dark Pact. On top of that, they also nerfed the damage on it, so like you're going to be losing a lot more damage on that as well. And again, without having Vaal Pact and Instant Leech, it's actually going to be a kind of annoying to sustain the playstyle of Dark Pact. However, I don't think that's the main issue here. I think it's mainly the area that is the big nerf, and like you could build it still if you wanted to, and I think it's still going to be viable. Whether or not it's the best build anymore, I don't know, because it was very powerful. It was definitely one of the top tier builds. And then I've got Cyclone in here. Cyclone, it got a few taps, but it's nothing major. It's still going to play exactly the same way. So basically, Queen of the Forest was something that Cyclone builds used. They used it to basically move around the map much quicker, and they also got the hit of Ruthless no longer works with Cyclone. And to be honest, it was kind of a weird interaction anyway. Like 1 in 3 of your spins would do a lot of damage. It was kind of like it was awkward and it was hard to understand for a lot of new players. So I can see why they're removing that. Although I'm pretty sure that Ruthless was one of the better gens to equip your Cyclone with. Um, so yeah, movement speed nerf and a little bit of damage nerf. It's not a big deal for Cyclone. And then I've got Blade Flurry on here as well, just because they changed Ruthless to basically no longer work with channeled skills. For a similar reason to Cyclone, like 1 in 3 of your channels would do a lot of damage, and that's kind of unintuitive and weird for a lot of players. So you kind of get this gameplay where you fire off 2, and then on the boss you'd have 3, you know. So yeah, they've basically removed that, and that might be a bit of a nerf to Blade Flurry, so you can't kind of manipulate that anymore for big damage. Next up, they say they've nerfed Wither. So you used to be able to get 20 Wither stacks, but now you can only get 15, and it's 6% instead of 7% per stack. Um, and they say they've rolled some of this kind of bonus stuff into the new curse, which I mentioned earlier, which I think is called, yeah, it's called Despair. So overall, it shouldn't be a hard nerf to curse builds, but it probably will be a little bit of a nerf because Wither was really, really strong. I'm kind of not really too unhappy to see it go. I much prefer using a curse to having to stack 20 stacks of something on it with a spell totem. Okay, so here's the other big kind of target that GGG smashed, and that's Vaal Power Siphon. So Vaal Power Siphon was easily the biggest abuser of Queen of the Forest, like stacking as much evasion as humanly possible, and then just running around one-shotting the entire map like off the screen. That's no longer going to be possible. A, because they nerfed the movement speed on Queen of the Forest, and B, they completely gutted the range on Vaal Power Siphon. So at the moment it's 120, which is way off your screen. Like it'll hit mobs like that you can't even imagine possible. And now it will probably just hit mobs on the screen. So it's been 120 to 70. So it's almost half, which that's like a massive nerf. Like that's colossal. So will it still see play? Possibly. It's still a very powerful skill. It doesn't have any target cap on it, so you can literally hit everything on the screen still. So it's still maybe good enough to play. However, this is a really big blow, and it won't be as powerful as it once was. Next, it's kind of just a few minor nerfs. So Barrage, the enchant in the Uber Lab, which is the last labyrinth, has been changed from a maximum of 2 to 1. So you're basically going to lose 1 barrage projectile from your ultimate endgame setup. This doesn't really change anything. Barrage is still easily the best single target bow and wand skill. You're still only going to use Barrage. You're not going to use anything else. And if you do, you're just kind of like doing it for fun, because it's not competitive with damage at all, really. So yeah. Next up, Ice Shot. This is a really weird nerf to me. I thought Ice Shot was a really cool niche ability, and they've kind of said no, we don't like that. So basically, Ice Shot has a threshold jewel which lets you pierce 5 targets per threshold jewel. And that's really huge because the Pierce gem only gives you like I think it's 3, maybe it's even 2. I'm not 100% sure, but yeah. So for it to give 5 is massive, and I believe you can have 2 of them, so you could pierce up to a total of 10. So basically, there's no way you're not piercing everything on the screen. So you basically get kind of classic 100% chance to pierce. And now with it being changed from 5 to 3, you actually need 2 threshold jewels to pretty much achieve what you did with 1 before. So that's a really massive nerf. And I don't really understand exactly why that was put in because I think it's pretty fair. Ice shot doesn't do the most damage, and you can't really like abuse it. Like I mean, there was a few ice shot builds. It was mainly used with a champion though, using curses and being a curse bot. So maybe they will need to like find an alternative. But 6 is still a really good amount to pierce. So I would probably still use ice shot for that as well. So no impact really there. Next up with Mind Over Matter, they just nerfed the nodes behind it overall. So it's basically like a 50% reduction on the big node and then a little like minor nerfs on the smaller nodes. So nothing too huge. And then Vaal Pact, as we all know, has been changed. It's no longer instant leech, and it's down the bottom of the tree. It's just going to double your leech. The footage you're seeing behind you of me doing Beachhead is actually I'm playing without Vaal Pact, and I'm also playing with a Blood Rage on myself, and I'm also playing with Elemental Reflect still implemented in the game. So honestly, you don't need Volpact for just like everyday mapping. As long as you play careful and you're not kind of like an idiot with what you stand in, Volpact isn't really required. You can completely just like not even worry about it. Just get yourself a Vinctar, maybe set up Curse on Hit Warlords with your Herald of Ice, and get Leech on Boots, and you're pretty much good to go. I wouldn't worry too much about the nerf. Especially with Reflect being gone, like there's nothing that's really gonna endanger your character unless you are kind of playing too recklessly. So yeah, Valpact nerf, it's mainly gonna affect boss killers. Like a lot of the spellcasting boss killers relied heavily on Valpact to kind of like stay in the game. And spellcasters aren't really going to be able to get down to Valpact because it's near the duelist now. So it's kind of in a really hard place. I expect a lot of the spellcaster boss killers will be going with life regen, maybe pairing that with Zealot's Oath and getting a shitload of energy shield. That's what I plan on doing. Like I got a few builds which I got 14k ES, regenerating 2 to 2,500 energy shield per second, and I'm gonna be playing something like that as my boss killer. But yeah, like so the Valpact nerf isn't really a big deal. I don't really, it doesn't phase me. Even if they left Reflect in, it wouldn't be a big deal in my opinion. Okay, so that's all the nerfs. Now moving on to the buffs. This is really where I think GGG let us down a little bit. They really haven't taken the time to go over a lot of the other skills and really buff them up and make them viable and interesting to use. There's a lot of them which they just have left for years now, so I'm kind of a bit sad to see them not get buffed in this end game expansion, which focuses on adding variety to the end game. So basically, what they've done is they've buffed Detonate Dead, just flat out just increase the damage. That makes sense with all the new corp stuff. They've also focused a lot on minions. It seems they really wanted to make minions a thing, like a really competitive thing. So after the last patch, they nerfed Summon Raging Spirit pretty heavily. They're now rebuffing it. So basically what they've done is they've taken the less added damage multiplier on it, which basically means if you put added lightning on it or you have an aura on it like Wrath, it will be 30% less effective on like the minion. It'll only gain 70% of that buff as opposed to the full amount. Basically they've changed that 30% to a 15%. So basically you're going to be getting 15% more from like your added chaos, added lightning, added fire, whatever. All of your wraths and all that stuff. So that's pretty good. Summon Raging Spirit's gonna have a little bit more damage. I don't think it's gonna be like game breaking or anything, but yeah, it's a buff. They've done a similar thing with Summon Skeletons. However, this one is massive. They've taken the Summon Skeletons similarly less added damage from 30%, which was similar to Summon Raging Spirit, and they've changed it to 50% more. So they haven't just buffed it to like 0 or 15, they've changed it to 50% more. So you're going to get 50% more damage from your auras, and that's kind of almost seems like a typo. So they're basically buffing the absolute hell out of Summon Skeletons. Did it need it? Maybe. I do see a lot of people playing Summon Skeletons, specifically the mage ones, so I'm not entirely sure it did need it, but I guess they just really want them to be a thing. It's a pretty cool skill. I've never really played around with it too much myself, because it's kind of a static, slower kind of play style, but Yeah, it's definitely there, and it's definitely very strong now. It'll do a lot of damage. Maybe it'll be a really good boss killer. That would be interesting to try. I might try that. They've also added there that Iron Will now work with the skeleton mages from summon spirits. So basically, if you decide to go with the Baron, and you want to put Iron Will on because you're stacking strength, it'll work with the spellcasters now. So you get the Baron buff, and you also get 40% more from Iron Will, 40% more spell damage. So yeah, that might be a thing to build around. I don't know. I don't play minion builds too much. Um, They've also said here, we all know that 5 base corpses instead of 3 on Desecrate, so that's a small buff there. They've also reduced the cooldown. It's kind of just quality of life in my opinion. I'm curious to see whether the 5 will go to 7 with the Necromancer Ascendancy. I think that could be quite interesting, because I believe that one of the Ascendancies does give 2 extra corpses. And then here's another huge one for minions. They've increased the minion life gem, which before gave 49% increased life at the top end, which is basically like a couple nodes on the tree, and now it's 49% more. So what does that mean? So let's say you have a minion with 100 life, and you get 20% increased life on the tree, then it's 120, and now instead of just having the gem give you like another percentage on that 100, it'll multiply that 120 by 49% again. So it's like a really massive buff to how tanky you can get your minions. Um, was this needed? Not really, but I don't think anyone was using the minion life gem, so maybe people will now. It could be pretty cool with the minion instability kind of stuff. So yeah, that could be kind of a new build maybe. I haven't tried anything like that, but yeah, it could be interesting. I look forward to seeing the Reddit builds on that. They've said here that they're buffing Ice Crash, Reave, and Earthquake Radius. They just needed it. It's quality of life. Nothing really to say here. I think that they need to do this with a lot of skills. Skills like Discharge and stuff kind of need just a little bit more area, and that could see maybe in the next patch we'll see that. They're also this one's a funny one because it kind of ties into what I was saying earlier. They're increasing life regen on gear. At the moment, it's kind of a joke. Like you'll get at the highest 7% per second life regen. They're buffing that to be on the top end of 20. So is this relevant? Yeah, I think it actually kind of is. And the reason I want to say that is because if you get life regen on rings, that's 40, and then helmet 60, chest piece 80, boots 90. This is assuming it's all capping at 20, and then you get sword and shield, all your pieces. You can get like extra 200 life regen, and then get zealot's oath on that, and then it's like yeah, it's looking pretty good. 200 energy shield per second. Like it's good. Like all this stuff kind of stacks up, and you could start getting like really crazy, especially with the trickster, which will double it, so that 200 is now 400. You know what I mean? It's kind of you get into something where it might actually be like useful to get that on your gear. Obviously, if you're playing an attack-based defensive character, you're not really interested in these defensive stats as much because you'd rather have attack modifiers on your gear. So it's basically not something that people are going to be like targeting, I don't think, but I think it's definitely good to see it not be completely useless. Um, okay, so that's all the like big nerfs and buffs. Kind of underwhelming in my opinion. But there are a few more discussion points which I would like to talk about in terms of the new patch and things they've specifically pointed out here, which kind of inadvertently nerf and buff different things. So for starters, they've said they're changing the divination card drop rates and locations that they drop. So this is actually particularly huge in my opinion. So we'll get to it later, but basically Zana doesn't give you Nemesis anymore. You cannot anymore, like you can't acquire that modifier anymore unless it's on Sextants, which I highly doubt. They haven't said anything about new Sextant modifiers. Um, so yeah, the only way to get Headhunter now is with divination cards. Um, so yeah, it'll be where does the what is it called? The Wretch drop? Where's the Valkyrie drop? You know, where's the Doctor drop? All that kind of stuff. If they've shaken that up, that could really change what maps we'll be running and what maps we won't be running. So that's really interesting to me. I would be highly interested to see if they changed the Doctor to one of the high-end red maps. That would be like a big change and would potentially influence like how you complete your atlas and stuff like that. Um, the other big one I think is that like Lycosidé and Biscos have had their rarity increased. Now I'm gonna assume that they're gonna change these to be about as rare as Comb's Heart or Shavs. That would just make sense. Is this a good change? Yes, I think it is a good change. I think that what this will do is it'll make Bisco's kind of a more exclusive item, so everyone won't feel like they have to use it. And you can kind of feel okay about using an amulet, which is good for your kind of build instead of just using Biscos every time. I also like this instead of like just nerfing the item into the ground, that they've kind of made it this chase item. Well, I hope they have. I hope it's not too common. And then it's kind of still there for the hardcore players who still want that kind of crazy loot explosion playstyle. But it's not there to kind of like force other players into a playstyle they don't like. In terms of like Today, that's a bit of a strange one. It's a very powerful item, but I'm not entirely sure why they chose a build like defining item to make this like high tier item, because this is like a really necessary item in things like cost per discharge. Like you need that item to actually play it properly, and things like a wand I also want to use this as well. So it's kind of an interesting choice. Maybe it's a good one, I don't know, but I'll definitely be picking up gold amulets and chancing whole quad tabs of them. Because I have nothing else to use my chance obs anymore. That makes the most sense. Another business opportunity is to potentially pick up all the gold amulets and just sell them each for an alc. I'm sure a lot of people will be buying stuff like that, and I will be doing that. Moving on, so this is a really huge one. I'm gonna actually pause the footage here and bring this up. So, GGG have said the following. The rules used to generate monsters in endgame maps have been significantly reworked and rebalanced around the rate at which we can expect players to reliably clear out the map. In general, narrow linear maps will contain fewer total monsters than maps with complex layouts. Okay, so this basically screams we're giving the strand treatment to everything. I really hope I'm wrong, but they're basically saying they're going to gut everything, which has a good layout. It's definitely one way to do it, but if they do this, I don't want them to see like that you can't get similar drops from map A and B, like just because of how many monsters there are, which I think will be the case, unfortunately. And I really don't want to see players who want to run the fast maps struggle to maintain a map pool, which is definitely a high possibility as well. So maybe the pack size stuff will offset this and it'll be similar to live, but I have a sneaking suspicion that we're going to get a lot of ghost town maps. Um, let's hope we're pleasantly surprised. The other thing is sextant modifiers I don't think are impacted by this at all, so it might still just be the best to pick a map and sextant the hell out of it and just get the smallest one possible to run it really fast. Not entirely sure, but yeah, this one has me pretty worried. Um, Not too keen on that. I really think that the solution they should have gone with is keeping all maps density the same, and then slapping a big XP handicap on some maps. So let's say if you run Strand, you get 50% less XP from Strand because of its layout, and just balance it by tweaking the percentage. But yeah, we'll see how it turns out. Okay, so last thing, the Zana sextant mods, and this is probably the biggest thing in the patch notes, and also the most disappointing thing in the patch notes. They've really slimmed down a lot of the league-specific options we have to choose from here. So one of the coolest thing about playing Path of Exile in the end game is being able to unlock Zana and have all these interesting leagues to go and try out. And the reason it's interesting is because each league has different chase uniques that were like exclusive to that league, and you can only get them through that league or through divination cards. I personally hate divination cards, and I think that they're kind of just boring, and you either win big or you win nothing. And I much prefer farming the content that was designed around those uniques as opposed to just handing in some div cards. So I actually really enjoyed running like Parandus and stuff like that. And I was hoping to see more leagues in here as opposed to less. But they've removed Parandus. We don't see any Nemesis, so the Headhunter is going to be quite difficult to obtain. And we also don't see Harbinger. I was really hoping to see Harbinger in here. I think it would have been really cool. I actually really enjoyed the flavor of Harbinger. Like it was kind of shit to have it as the whole league, of course, but it was nice to kind of do the beachhead, get those cool items. Like the belt was really cool. I really like the helmet, and it looks like unless they're a sextant modifier, that we're just not going to be able to even access them these leagues. So yeah, kind of disappointed, really disappointed actually in their choice of what they did with Zana. I think this was a really bad choice. I don't think anyone's ever going to use this ever. And if they do, they're either going to be extremely disappointed or extremely happy. And I don't think that's a really good like kind of trade-off. Having said that though, is 3 strong boxes worth 3 chaos? Probably. Is 3 extra shrines? Keep in mind a shrine has 3 packs generally around it. Is that worth 3 chaos? Maybe. Essence, 2 extra essences, that's definitely worth 3 chaos, and obviously the breach is worth 3 chaos. So maybe it'll be good. I don't know, but bloodlines, that's definitely not worth 3 chaos, and neither is anarchy. So yeah, maybe you'll just spam Fortune Favors the Brave. It's possible. I'm not sure, but I would have liked to see more leagues in here. So in conclusion, what are they doing? They're making clear speed a little bit worse, with specific builds in mind. They haven't touched Necro. They haven't touched EK. I'm really surprised about the EK one. Like that one seemed to be like the biggest abuser of hit the whole screen. Not sure why they butchered Dark Pact and not EK. That's definitely a mystery to me. They really like kind of dropped the ball on buffing stuff. They haven't said about like anything to do with buffing uniques, which I'm pretty sad about because I was hoping for a big wave of buffs on uniques. We haven't seen that, and um, while the nerfs were required, I think they went a little bit overboard, especially on Acuity. That could have been a really cool chase unique. Let's keep in mind though, let's stay positive. Brand new league. The league mechanic looks pretty good. 48 new uniques, which maybe will create new builds. Like that new wand looks cool. KB is still fine as well, so the wand will like actually have a use. The 10th skill gem might be really interesting, and we do have the possibility of a balanced atlas, maybe. And I really do like what they did here with like Costa Day and Viscos. That was a really like cool change in my opinion. I think they should do that for a few more items. Maybe not ones like Costa Day, which you actually need. That kind of sucks for the like kind of more budget players. But yeah, Viscos was a really good change. I'd like to see that on a few other ones. Maybe adjust the rolls on Ventus and maybe like make that a little bit easier to get a good one, but maybe make it really rare. That would be cool. One final thing though, I will say is if they mess this up like even a little bit, I think that the expansion could be very bad. So what I have in mind here is Vault. If you've watched my other videos, you'll know that Vault is definitely the best tier 14 hands down, and it probably is the best tier 15 as well. So you probably don't even want a tier 15, you just want to run Vault. And if Vault still drops the divination card for Exalted Orb, like there's 2 different ones in there, at any good rate, then the only map we'll ever get to run is Vault. And the reason for this is because you can basically almost infinitely sustain a tier 13 and Vault and just switch between the two, which you never used to be able to do because Vault wasn't shapeable. So if they mess up the Vault balancing, it could be a nightmare and we could all just be running Vault the entire time, which isn't fun. So yeah, hopefully guys you enjoyed this. We do have a few big question marks still. A lot about the Abyss Jewels and Elder and Shaper items. I will be making shorter videos on those, more concise and like kind of to the point. But yeah, sorry for the long video. Hopefully you guys like enjoyed this discussion. And if you guys have any ideas about anything here, definitely drop some comments in the description. I would really, really love to read those. I enjoy reading all the comments. So yeah, thanks again. Cheers. See you in the next one.